in your face. Iki, originality. Iki is uniqueness. In many ways, Japanese culture doesn't celebrate uniqueness. As the Japanese proverb goes, the nail that sticks up is pounded down. Therefore, a better translation of Iki is refined uniqueness. Iki is a movie character who's badass with style and grace. Joha Q. Slow, accelerate, end. Joha Q is a tempo that can be translated as start slowly, accelerate, and then end suddenly. This aesthetic is used by traditional Japanese crafts such as the tea ceremony. It's also widely practiced in Japanese martial arts. It encourages you to take your time and to pay attention. In the tea ceremony, it involves silently sharing feelings and emotions. Modern uses include movies, music, and advertising. Yugen means the mysterious. Yugen states that all life is boring when the facts are known. Something should be held back, the mystery. Every ever watch a movie that doesn't explain everything? That's Yugen. Gaido, discipline and ethics. Have you ever noticed that the Japanese martial arts and the traditional arts are all about discipline? Ethics and discipline make things more attractive. Enzo, the void. Enzo is a Zen concept. It is often represented by a circle. It can mean infinity or nothingness. It's a little hard to explain. You need to spend a lot of time meditating to really get it. Kawaii, cute. Some argue that this is a new Japanese aesthetic. Others say that kawaii has always been part of Japanese culture. Either way, it has certainly become the most popular Japanese aesthetic in recent years. Mano no aware, literally the pathos of things, and also translated as an empathy towards things, or a sensitivity to ephemera. It is a Japanese term for the awareness of impermanence, mujo, or transience of things, and both a transient, gentle sadness or wistfulness at their passing, as well as a longer and deeper sadness about the state of being, the reality of life, that things just don't last forever. These are the rules and philosophies guiding what might be summed up as the aesthetic standards for classical and representational art in European and Japanese cultures. Both cultures have been heavily influenced by the art of their neighbors, like India and the rest of Eurasia, which separates these societies. These principles can be thought of as foundational knowledge necessary to understanding or creating representational art and illustration when studying these societies. Cartoons have lasted for a long time in both societies. These images are often whimsical, imaginative, and sometimes satirical. All of this is determined by the intent of their creators, revealing much about the historical timing of the work along with the personal psyche of the authors. The convention of the speech bubble means that in many cases, we don't need to guess at what we're seeing in the scene. It's being said. The multi-panel structure of comics makes this an excellent way to tell a sequential narrative. Animation with its movement and sound is an even more empathic way of connecting with an audience. It includes music and cinematic techniques that transport an audience to fantasy worlds. Having to primarily use imagery that was gathered from the art store websites resources provided me with the interesting challenge of generating a presentation that is being transmitted via the internet. As you know, all of the major classic cartoon characters are owned and trademarked, guarded by the companies that created them or now own them. You can't blame them for protecting their intellectual properties. After all, the many children's lunchboxes, t-shirts, along with the toys and collectibles that fill adults' cubicles, are the means by which these huge industries make their money. I've seen excellent sitcom animation shows be canceled in the past just purely due to the fact that their merchandise didn't sell, even though the shows remained very popular with their audiences. With cosplay and pirated cartoons easily available online, it's getting harder for media giants to survive. If you love a cartoon, please buy the official merchandise to support its artists. Not having access to model sheets and character animation to include for visual reference wasn't that big of a problem for explaining animation and how that is going to utilize visual literacy. I already covered much of that because animators learn as much about what they can from the masters of art, just as much as any sculptor or painter. An animation student who fails to visit art museums and learn art history will usually be regretful in their professional work, as they must invent new art when they're in tight deadlines rather than being able to reference it. Providing art students with training on how to best research and utilize resources is very important to my teaching. It's a shame not to learn time-saving skills and then have to learn them through trial and error later on, when there's already great design principles and visual research methods that anyone can incorporate. I've always collected such artistic tools that I've encountered over the years, and each one is a treasure that has improved my capacity to make better work. The Association of College and Research Libraries, Visual Literacy Competency Standards for Higher Education, provides a research framework to understand a given artwork's full place in the world. It serves as an excellent companion to the methods I borrowed from Brian Kennedy earlier in gaining visual literacy. Visual literacy appealed to me strongly because of how useful its criteria is in teaching animation students the important factors to absorb when looking at an artwork. Like many art students, I learned to dread open and directionless critiques of work early on in college. These meandering sessions dragged on as a group of novices ran through the contents of their limited knowledge and experience until we exhaustedly dragged on to the next artwork. It was common for instructors who aggressively redrew or criticized work to be labeled as mean, but most students appreciated their honest criticism. The teachers I liked best were the ones who would start a critique with a brief description of the criteria and instruction for the assignment before we would start talking. Structuring the discourse that would then follow, it made us accountable for creating expectations in our critique that would match the existing ones that were given for the assignment. It also shielded us from unrelated criticisms and kind of the lengthy dialogue that would follow those without really helping anyone. The setting of ground rules is a helpful skill to learn, as it's the best way to start any animated project. A clear plan. This is usually a script, a clear set of instructions that does not require 1,000 words to produce a picture. The beauty of words exists in how clearly they can describe an action or idea with little effort. The beauty of words exists in how clearly they can describe an idea or action with very little effort. Something like the dawn of time or New York City in a blizzard is fast to add in as part of a sentence versus the long time it would take to draw or paint the many images needed to communicate those same concepts to an audience. I find that I blunder when tackling something with poorly defined heuristics or guidelines. A tremendous amount of energy can be wasted in hitting the broadside of a bullet with a barn, where you attempt to strike a small precise target with a huge object and massive effort, versus aiming a bullet at a small target on a barn. The Association of College and Research Libraries Visual Literacy Competency Standards for Higher Education encourages students to unearth the historic facts that add storytelling content and sociological context to their artwork. It trains students in the proper appropriation of imagery and how to navigate the immense resources available to them through a librarian's extended network. I was able to use the resources at my college's library to gather the books and articles to weigh one form aesthetic philosophy to another for my classes related to Japanese anime. Anime is clearly inspired by the cartoons of the West, specifically those of Walt Disney, with their large eyes and dainty mouths. Though these cartoons are highly influenced by the linear shape-driven works of Art Nouveau, which were in turn influenced by woodblock printed ukiyo-e's that Japan had shipped there. Of course, Japan was also highly influenced by China, Korea, and India, in addition to the indigenous Ainu culture. Some authorities say that the first comics were created by Katsushika Hokusai in his manga or sketches, or the much earlier 12th century Choju Jimbutsu Giga, or frolicking animal scrolls. While hieroglyphs and cave art predate these characters, These may be the first humorous depictions of people going about their daily lives. This character is what is so crucial to animation. An interesting take on daily life that feels both authentic yet appeals to us as memorable and funny. Veteran Disney animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson talk about this in their book, The Illusion of Life. While you can look at any bit of animation as a problem to solve, the puzzle pieces you need to engineer together to animate with are gained through a lifetime of observing the people around yourself. Most animators carry a sketchbook with them to record the day's events as a series of doodles. This is what makes the visuals in animation go beyond what words can say. There are several representational artists that the animators are encouraged to study for their unique mastery of specific emotions or of humor. Not everything in cartoons criticizes human folly. Exaggeration improves a performance, but it should be done in a careful and controlled way. They uncovered ways to directly tap into the human psyche with a careful limb placement and energetic line qualities in their work. The few I selected are my own personal favorites. There are certainly more. Leonardo da Vinci is a master of construction and engineering. His anatomical studies were the first to capture both the essence of natural function along with the mechanics of how the human body works. Draw like this and your work will function in a living way. Katie Kolowitz captures the love between a mother and a child as no other. Whether it is the joy of a mother and a baby, or the tragedy of a child's death, this artist drew upon her own life experiences, both joyful and painful, to make imagery like no other. Henri Daumier satirized caricatured the world around him imaginatively. His biting representations of kings and politicians are terrific, but he was equally skilled at capturing the interesting lives of his fellow people as well. Heinrich Clay makes expressive gestural ink drawings of animals and humans that leap off the page in energetic animated poses. His imagination originated the dancing alligators and elephants from Disney's Fantasia. He could make even machinery feel alive and full of character. Frederick Remington, an American painter, traveled to the West capturing the vanishing prairie and buffalo on canvas. There is a lot of personality and action in his drawings. Andrew Loomis, a phenomenal illustrator and teacher who made great books on drawing. His book Creative Illustration has incredible geometric grids used to build compositions, some of which I showed you earlier. Finally, there's Norman Rockwell. Despite dismissal by major art critics in his lifetime, this illustrator's work has withstood the test of time. He captured the true essence of people in his paintings. People are subtly caricatured to tease out their inner personalities. With all of these skillful artists to learn from, a developing animator has many potential problems already solved for them. Every one of them will continue to influence one's artwork for the better. You will pick up more nuances to create the best performance. Keep an eye out for the work of master communicators. Once you have acting mastered, you can focus on imagination and cinematic storytelling. Okay, so the next thing you probably would like to know is how do you actually build an animated character? Well, the typical way of starting off when you're teaching this as a lesson is to build a flour sack. Now, when you're drawing this flour sack, you're going to try to give it a bit of an attitude. So the first flour sack I'm going to make will be a sad flour sack. It'll kind of have this depressed quality to it. You'll see there's this line of action that curves along its back. The next one I'll draw will be a happy flour sack. You can see it's kind of jumping up. You can see one of the little tabs on the edge of it are kind of going up. The other one's pulled down. And we really want to make sure that we draw the flour into these sacks. So you can see I'm going back in and drawing an actual piece of circle. And this represents the weight and energy of a flour sack. So you have two components to this. A soft, sort of silly putty-like lump of flour, and then over this is a flexible outer skin, sort of like an octopus's skin. It can manipulate and stretch itself. So what you're seeing here is a thing called squash and stretch, and we're going to take these, and in a moment you'll see that I'm going to draw through both of them a line. This represents the spine of a character. Now, the neat thing about a flour sack is you can very quickly turn that into a sort of character by just adding this in, adding in a head, and now I'm going to add in some limbs on the depressed flour sack. You'll see that I'm trying to keep these knees and legs, the angles of them set up so that they're not actually tangling with one another, nor are they twinning or creating something that's too symmetrical. And over that, you'll see that I'm drawing these arms and that the hands are actually going up to the head, right? So we're creating a feeling of weight of that head by having them press down into the hands. Now, going back to the excited flour sack, you'll see that I'm trying not to, again, create a symmetrical pose. I'm trying to create a feeling with these pelvic areas. We also call this the barbells in animation, to create the feeling of kind of a lift and a movement. So there's an asymmetry built in. If you study figure drawing, this is also called contrapposto. And right down to the facial expression, you'll see that I'm trying to make this just a little bit asymmetrical. And there you have it. You have your very simple way of drawing a character. Well, there's other ways of drawing cartoon characters as well. Now, let's start this on off with a line of action. And now I'm going to break this down into 12 separate steps. So you'll see I'm drawing a head, neck, down through the chest, and here at the lumbar area it bends, here at the hips it bends, and down through the leg through to the foot. Right, you can see these various bends. Now, the neat thing about a jointed puppet like this is it's much easier to keep track of angles versus a line of action. So a lot of times it's good to have both built into a character. When you move it, you may want to make it more fluid and a little less kind of as though it has an endoskeleton. But there's also an advantage to being able to control these various jointed limbs, because depending on how you move these limbs is going to give this character a different sort of a weight, a different sort of personality, a different sensation of how much physical strength they possess. So it's kind of neat to play around with this. So you see that I'm kind of building this character into a pose. I'm adding in additional limbs. You see I can then move around the head. I can move around the various parts to try to create a little bit more of a personality. So when you're getting to kind of the end part of this, you do want to kind of think of like which shoulder is higher, which shoulder is lower. Unlike the pelvis, where you can see that the pelvis has that barbell quality, where one ball on the barbell goes up, the other one has to come down. In the case of the shoulders, they're very free in the location. And of course, this character I'm going to have holding a weight in one hand. So you can see that that's causing strain on this one leg. It has to hold up the weight somewhat. And let's give them kind of a fun expression. Always try to draw the eyes in on an animated character. You never want to neglect including the eyes. Okay, and that finishes that up. So you can see that relating this to the previous images from the more skilled artists that inspire me, it's not nearly the same level. So again, we're always aspiring to reach that higher level. And I think just in general, we want to try to always raise the quality of things as we're working. I am interested in researching the subject to show how critical the act of making art is to being fully visually literate, and want to share the long history of philosophy and science that are part of the critical research in fully investigating the meaning of an image. It is important for artists to expand the criteria that they use to critique art beyond just inherent meaning and beauty. We need to expand our existing artistic syntax, always questioning how we can improve ourselves as artists. Learning how other disciplines interpret visual imagery provides artists with opportunities to expand their consciousnesses. It is normal for an artist to become hyper-focused within just their area of artistic craft. I was only fractionally visually literate working as an animation artist. Much of what I've learned I simply absorbed on my job. This new intellect that you can develop through this critical thinking, it works independently of the primary one, allowing the philosophies and skills of the initial artistic expertise to operate without the compromise or loss of its initial focus. The new perspectives generated by the operation of both this new analytical critical thinking area and the instinctual one generates greater expertise because of a powerful synergy. It creates perspectives and solutions impossible without a duality of mind. Using the perspectives of different academic disciplines merged through the practice of visual literacy gives you even greater breadth of visual and mental field. By using all of these tools when we create things, we tell a story, and this allows us to make a connection with our audience. There is weakness in any approach that does not involve the stages of research. I'll bring up Occam's razor, which suggests that when looking at two hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions should be the one selected. There is a power of knowing that it is good to be wrong. This is just as it is important to know that when you have an opinion, you have to ask yourself, why do you have that opinion? We can acknowledge the importance of learning from our failures this way. We want to be careful that we do not fall victim to the Dunning-Kruger effect. As that suggests, incompetent people will fail to recognize their own lack of skill, fail to recognize the extent of their inadequacy, and fail to accurately gauge skill in others. Now, this is a very grim reality, but fortunately, this effect also says that you can recognize and acknowledge your own lack of skill after you've been exposed to training for that skill. So this is an example I'm going to show you in animation, a replication of how a group of people saw a train coming at them in an early film. No one had ever seen this before, so they reacted in horror. They had no context for what they saw, and there was a reaction that was very ludicrous from our perspective, not from theirs. This reaction highlights the tendency to take one's own artistic literacy as a given. In this case, they just believed it was real. But where the danger of making a dumb idea sound good and rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, so to speak. I have a few quotes that I want to end with. One is from Jesse Richardson. To expand awareness, choose to become engaged in questioning things rather than focusing on an answer. Rudolf Arnheim, in Art and Visual Perception, A Psychology of the Creative Eye, said, "In many ways we are trapped within the shell of our own heads. Breaking out of this cave is critical to directly experiencing reality." Quote from Marcus Aurelius, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." And Oscar Wilde, "Appearance blinds, whereas words reveal because we often dismiss the sum for the total." Thank you. What follows is a list of my resources for putting this talk together. Thank you all for being my audience today. I really, really appreciate all of you taking your time to listen to my presentation.